The glass never lied. Vale had learned that a long time ago. Not in school, not from her mother, not from any of the books she read on the subway ride to work every morning. She learned it standing behind a bar at 17, watching a man smile at his wife while squeezing another woman's hand under the table. She learned it carrying trays through private dining rooms where billion-dollar deals were sealed with a handshake and a lie. She learned it the hard way, the way most invisible people do, by watching. And tonight something was very wrong. Please help me get to 1,000 subscriber by hitting the subscribe button, like, and comment where you watching from. Thank you. The Aldrin Club sat on the 42nd floor of a building that most people in the city never even noticed. No sign. No street entrance. Just a private elevator that required a key card, a code, and the kind of last name that opened doors before you even knocked. Mara had worked here for 3 years. Long enough to know every guest by their drink order. Long enough to know which smiles were real and which ones cost money. She smoothed the front of her black uniform jacket and stepped out of the service corridor, tray balanced on her palm, face blank and professional. The dining room hummed with the low, careful noise of people who never had to raise their voices to be heard. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight. String quartet music floated from the corner. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered 42 stories below like a world that belonged to someone else. It belonged to people like Dominic Raines. He sat at table 7, always table 7, with the kind of stillness that very powerful men have. Not relaxed. So, like a machine that was always running, always calculating even when it appeared to be at rest. He was 44, dark-haired, sharp-jawed, the kind of man whose photograph appeared in financial magazines beside words like visionary and ruthless depending on who was writing. His suit probably cost more than Mara earned in 2 months. He had a glass of single malt whiskey in front of him that he had barely touched. Across from him sat his wife. Selene Raines was the kind of beautiful that made people forget to breathe. 36 years old, ivory skin, dark eyes that caught light the way mirrors did, giving back exactly what you wanted to see. She wore a gown the color of deep water and a smile that seemed to say, "I am exactly what you need me to be." She touched Dominic's arm when she laughed. She refilled his water glass before he asked. She was in every visible way the perfect wife. And seated beside her, very small and very quiet, was Ivy. Ivy Raines was 9 years old, with her father's dark hair and her mother's cheekbones. Her real mother, the one who had died 2 years ago in a car accident on a wet November road. She sat with her hands folded on the table, her head slightly tilted the way blind people sometimes do, listening to the world instead of watching it. Her eyes were open but unfocused, drifting gently the way eyes do when they've given up the habit of finding things to land on. Mara had been watching this family for 6 months. She told herself it was professional habit. Anticipate what the guests need before they ask. Know who drinks too fast and who eats too slow. Know who's celebrating and who's pretending to. That's what you did when your job was to be invisible. You watched. But the truth was simpler than that. Something about the little girl made Mara unable to look away. She moved toward table 7 now, lifting 2 empty glasses from a nearby station to give herself a reason to pass close. She didn't need to hear the conversation. She already knew what it would look like. Selene's mouth moving close to Ivy's ear. Ivy going very still. Not the stillness of a child listening to a secret. The stillness of a child bracing for something. Mara set the glasses down at the service station and turned back toward the room. He was right. Selene's lips were pressed close to Ivy's ear, her smile perfectly intact for anyone watching from across the room. But Ivy's hands had tightened on the edge of the table. Her knuckles had gone white. And when Selene pulled back, Ivy sat for a moment with her chin dropped slightly, like something inside her had just gotten a little smaller. Dominic was looking at his phone. He didn't see it. He never saw it. That was the thing Mara had noticed first weeks ago, long before she started connecting the dots. Dominic Raines was a man who paid close attention to everything in his professional world and almost nothing in his personal one. He read balance sheets like scripture. He remembered the names of every associate, every competitor, every senator who owed him a favor. But he did not notice when his daughter's shoulders curled inward at the dinner table. He did not notice when she flinched at the sound of Selene's voice in a way that had nothing to do with being startled. He did not notice that the warmth his wife showed in public was a performance, and that the curtain came down the moment he looked away. Mara had started keeping notes on her phone. Little ones. Timestamps and observations. Ivy reaches for bread roll. Selene moves basket out of reach, smiles, says something. Dominic laughs. Ivy stands up, knocks chair into Selene. Dominic apologizes to Selene on Ivy's behalf. Ivy says nothing. Looks like she wants to disappear. Selene tells Dominic that Ivy said she doesn't want dessert. Ivy's face. He wanted it. She said nothing. Small things. The kind that could each be explained away. A bad day. A tired child. A misunderstanding. But Mara had grown up in a house where small things added up to something very large, and she knew what the pattern looked like before the picture finished forming. 3 weeks ago she had seen Selene do something she still couldn't explain. It was during cocktail hour before the main dining room opened. The club had a wide marble corridor that led from the elevator lobby to the lounge, lined with decorative side tables and potted plants at precise intervals. Mara had been carrying a tray of champagne flutes toward the lounge when she'd noticed Selene in the corridor, alone. Ivy was just behind her, moving carefully along the wall the way she always did in unfamiliar spaces, one hand trailing lightly against the surface, navigating by memory and touch. Selene reached out and moved one of the decorative side tables. Just a few inches. Just enough. Ivy walked into it. Hard. The edge caught her hip and she stumbled, grabbing the wall. Her face went through a rapid sequence. Shock, pain, confusion. Then that thing Mara hated seeing. The doubt. The expression of a child wondering if she had miscounted her own steps, if she had misremembered the space she thought she knew. And Selene turned around immediately. Rushed to her. Put her arms around her. Told her it was okay, that it was just an accident, that she was safe. She was the one who had caused it. And she was the one who showed up to fix it. Mara had stood motionless in the corridor for 3 full seconds before a coworker touched her arm and asked if she was all right. He had said yes. She had kept walking. She had done what she always did. But she had not forgotten. Tonight was the Aldrin Club's annual winter gala. 300 guests. The governor was here. A film director. 2 tech founders who had been on magazine covers this year. The room was fuller than usual, louder than usual, more electric. Wait staff moved in careful choreography between tables and the kitchen doors swung in steady rhythm. Mara had been on her feet since 4 in the afternoon and her lower back ached in a deep, dull way that she'd learned to ignore. She moved through the room with her tray, refilling water glasses, collecting empty appetizer plates, tracking the invisible map of the space she'd memorized over 3 years. She knew where every table was. She knew how the light shifted after 9 p.m. when they dimmed the chandeliers for the second course. She knew which guests tipped and which ones didn't. She knew when a table needed attention before they signaled for it. She also knew that Selene had excused herself from table 7 minutes ago. And that Ivy was sitting alone, which never happened. Dominic had moved 2 tables down to speak with a man Mara recognized as a state senator. His back was to his daughter. The conversation had the body language of something important. Both men leaning in, voices low, the kind of talk that didn't get interrupted. Mara adjusted her route. She came around the long way, past the bar, so that she approached table 7 from an angle where she could see the empty seat, the half-finished plates, and Ivy sitting very still with both hands flat on the tablecloth. The girl's chin was tipped up slightly, the way she did when she was listening hard. Her lips were pressed together. Mara slowed. Selene came back into the room from the direction of the restrooms. She moved gracefully between tables, touching a shoulder here, exchanging a smile there. She was the kind of woman who made a room feel like she had already been expected. She reached table 7 and sat down, setting her small evening bag on the table beside her plate. She leaned toward Ivy and said something. Ivy nodded. Then Selene opened her evening bag. Mara watched. She was 2 tables away. She had a reason to be here, an empty wine glass at the adjacent table. She picked it up, kept her eyes forward the way she was trained to, the way all good waitstaff learned to look like they were looking at nothing while actually taking everything in. Selene's hand moved inside the bag. She brought out a prescription pill bottle. Small. White. She opened it and shook 1 tablet into her palm. Then she reached across the table toward the glass of water in front of Ivy. Mara stopped moving. She had seen Ivy take her medication before. Once 2 months ago Dominic had administered it himself. A specific tablet, a prescription bottle he kept in his jacket pocket, the careful ritual of a father who was trying in this one small way to do right by his daughter. She remembered the bottle. Orange. A label. The kind that pharmacies put on prescriptions. The bottle in Selene's hand was white. Different. Mara's chest went cold. She told herself she could be wrong. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself there were 100 explanations. A new prescription, a different bottle, a vitamin, something completely ordinary. She was a waitress. She didn't know anything about this family's medical routine. He had no right to assume. But she also remembered the table moved 2 inches in the corridor. She remembered Ivy's face the moment before Selene's arms closed around her. She remembered a voice from her own childhood, low and calm in the dark, saying things that sounded reasonable and felt like the ground falling away. Ivy reached for the glass. The tablet was already sitting beside it. The room seemed to slow down. The string quartet stretched into something underwater. The candlelight bent. Mara felt the tray in her hand as if from a great distance, felt the cool, smooth weight of it against her palm, and she thought, if I am wrong, I lose this job. I lose my income. I lose 3 years of building this career, this reference, this stability. Ivy's fingers touched the glass. I lose everything I have worked for. Ivy started to lift it. Mara set the tray down on the nearest table. It hit the surface harder than she meant. The sound was a sharp, flat crack that turned heads. She moved 3 steps and her voice came out loud and clear and completely wrong for this room, completely wrong for the soft, careful, invisible person she had trained herself to be. Sir. Dominic Raines turned. Don't let her take that. 300 people heard her. The string quartet stopped mid-note. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Mara Vale had ever heard. For 1 full second nobody moved. Then everybody moved at once, heads turning, chairs scraping, the low sound of alarmed murmuring starting up like a fire catching. Dominic Raines was already on his feet, crossing the distance between tables in 4 long strides, and Mara forced herself to stand still, to not back up, to not fold under the weight of 300 pairs of eyes. Selene recovered first. Of course she did. What on earth? She let the confusion play across her face in perfect proportion. Not overdone. Not theatrical. Just the right amount of bewildered hurt that a loving stepmother would feel when a staff member launched herself at the family dinner. Dominic, I don't understand. What's happening? Dominic said. He was looking at Mara, and his voice was the voice of a man who was used to getting immediate, accurate answers. Who are you? I'm Mara Vale. I've been your family's waitress here for 3 years. She kept her voice level. He did not look at Selene. The medication your daughter was about to take is not her prescription. Dominic's eyes went to the table. To the glass of water, the tablet beside it, the small white bottle near Selene's plate. Dominic. Selene's voice was warm and calm and full of pained patience. Ivy's doctor adjusted her prescription last week. This is the new dosage. Mara, is it? I appreciate your concern, but this isn't. Then you'll have her prescription bottle with you, Mara said. Silence. Excuse me. Her prescription. The one with the pharmacy label. With Ivy's name and the prescribing physician's name and the medication name printed on it. The bottle in your bag. Mara's heart was hammering so hard she was certain the people nearest to her could hear it. Can I see it? A long beat. The kind that tells you everything. Selene's smile stayed perfectly in place. But something behind her eyes shifted. Something small and cold and fast, like a door swinging shut. I don't think the waitstaff is in a position to. Show me the bottles, Selene. Dominic's voice had changed. The color around Selene's collarbones shifted. She reached into her evening bag with steady hands. She set the white pill bottle on the table. No label. No pharmacy information. The kind of generic container you might buy in bulk online or fill yourself from another source. And then, from the depths of her bag, when she pulled her hand back out, came with it. An orange prescription bottle. Ivy's name. Ivy's physician. Unopened. The real medication still sealed, rolling across the tablecloth. Dominic picked it up. He looked at it for a moment that seemed to stretch and stretch and stretch. Mara watched his face move through something private and terrible. The face of a man who had just seen a door open into a room he didn't know existed in his own house. I can explain, Selene started. Don't. His voice was barely above a whisper. That was worse than shouting. Don't. Selene turned to the room, to the 300 people staring, to the governor 2 tables over, to the faces of every person whose good opinion she had spent the last 2 years carefully collecting. Mara could see her recalculating. Rebuilding. She had been doing this her whole life. She was very good at it. This is a misunderstanding, Selene said clearly, addressing the room now, her voice strong and reasonable. I have been Ivy's stepmother for a year and a half. I have cared for her every single day. I love that child. Whatever this woman thinks she saw. There's more, Mara said. And here was the moment she had told herself she might never use. The thing she had done 3 weeks ago, alone at home at 2 in the morning, staring at her notes on her phone, telling herself she was paranoid, telling herself to let it go, and then doing it anyway because she could not live with herself if she didn't. She took her phone out of her uniform pocket. Her hands were not steady. She noticed that. She pressed play anyway. The audio was quiet at first. Ambient club noise, the sound of footsteps, the muffled acoustics of the marble corridor. Then Selene's voice, smooth and private, thinking it was speaking only to a child who could not see. She can't see anything. She won't even know. Then Ivy's voice, small and uncertain. But what if Dad? Your dad believes what I tell him. He always has. You know that, don't you, sweetheart? And then the sound of a table scraping against marble. And Ivy crying out in surprise and pain. And then Selene's voice again, instantly warm, instantly the rescuer. Oh baby, I'm so sorry, let me help you, let me help you. Mara stopped the recording. The room was completely, absolutely still. Selene stood at the table with her hands clasped in front of her. The expression on her face was the most impressive thing Mara had ever seen. She was still trying. Still holding the shape of the woman she had constructed, even now, even here, even with the evidence sitting on the table and playing from a phone speaker in the middle of 300 witnesses. I want to speak to a lawyer, Selene said quietly. And that, in this room full of people who understood exactly what those words meant and when people said them, was the only confirmation anyone needed. Dominic Raines sat down in his chair. He sat down like a building settling, slowly, heavily, as if the supports had been removed and gravity had finally remembered to collect what it was owed. He set Ivy's prescription bottle on the table in front of him. He stared at it. Mara watched him and understood what she was seeing. He wasn't just realizing what Selene had done. He was realizing how long it had been happening. He was realizing every moment he'd looked at his phone instead of his daughter. Every time he'd apologized to Selene on Ivy's behalf. Every time he'd trusted the woman sitting across from him over the child sitting beside him, because the woman spoke in complete, confident sentences and the child had stopped talking very much at all. He was realizing what silence means when it comes from someone who used to speak. The club manager materialized at Mara's elbow. She felt him arrive before she saw him. The careful presence of a man managing a situation. 2 security personnel were already moving toward the table. A woman who Mara recognized as a physician, one of the members, Dr. Hale, was on her feet and crossing the room. And then, Ivy stood up. She didn't stand the way she usually did, with one hand reaching for the table's edge, with the careful measured movements of someone mapping the space around her before committing to it. She stood up the way someone stands when they've been sitting for a very long time and have finally decided that they are done. She stood up straight. And then she opened her eyes. Not the unfocused drift that Mara had watched for 6 months. Not the gentle wander of eyes that have given up looking for things to find. Clear, direct, settled, the way eyes are when they have spent a long time learning to be still. She looked at her father. Dominic made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound underneath words. The sound a person makes when something fundamental shifts inside them, when the world they understood turns out to have been a different world entirely. I'm not blind, Dad. Ivy's voice was steady. It was the voice of a 9-year-old who had decided something and was not going to let the weight of the room change her mind. I never was. I mean, she paused like she was searching for the right words, the way children do when they are trying to explain something adult that they have understood better than the adults. I had trouble seeing for a while after Mom died. The doctors said they called it functional. My eyes were fine. My brain just couldn't, it couldn't. She stopped. Started again. But then it got better. Mostly got better. And I didn't tell anyone. Dominic had not moved. His hands were flat on the table. Why? It wasn't a question. It was the only word he had left. Ivy looked at him. Really looked at him. And Mara realized with a jolt that this was the first time she had seen this child look at her father's face. That everything she had watched for 6 months, The tilted listening, the careful stillness, the navigating by sound and touch. All of it had been the performance of a 9-year-old who had decided that the only safe thing to do was to let people believe she couldn't see them. Because after Mom died, I didn't know who was safe, Ivy said. I didn't know who was being nice to me because they wanted to and who was being nice to me because they wanted something. And I figured out that when people think you can't see them, they act like themselves. They stop performing. She said that word, performing, with the particular precision of a child who had heard adults use it in a context that mattered. So I watched. I needed to know who people really were. She turned. She turned towards Selene with the kind of steadiness that took Mara's breath away. And I saw everything. Every single time. Every moved table, every switched pill, every whisper. Her voice dropped on that last part, not with fear but with something harder than fear. The solid weight of a child who has carried something alone for a very long time and has finally chosen to set it down. She hurt me, Dad. Every time you weren't looking. Selene's face did something complicated. The architecture of her expression went through several rapid iterations. Wounded, then reasonable, then cold, then wounded again. None of them landed. None of them fit anymore. She sat back down. Smoothed her gown. Said nothing. Because what do you say when the child you thought couldn't see you has been watching you all along? Dr. Hale reached the table. She spoke to the club manager in a low voice. 2 security personnel stood at professional distance, close enough to move if needed. Someone near the back of the room was crying. Mara didn't know who. Someone else was on their phone. Mara stood where she had been standing and did not move. He felt very strange. Her whole body was vibrating slightly, the way it does after something has gone through you, after an impact has passed and the aftershock hasn't finished traveling yet. She was still holding her phone. She put it back in her pocket. She became aware slowly that Dominic Raines was looking at her. He had gotten to his feet again. He was a man in the rubble of something. The tipped-forward posture of someone who has just watched a building come down and is trying to determine what is still standing. He opened his mouth. And before he could speak, Ivy was beside Mara. She had crossed the distance between them without hesitation. No hand along the wall, no careful testing of the floor. She moved through the room the way she had always been able to. And she reached up and took Mara's hand. Not because she needed guiding. She looked up at Mara with clear, dark, knowing eyes. She's the only one who protected me, Ivy said. To her father. To the room. To whoever was listening. Mara looked down at the small hand in hers. She thought about 3 years of being invisible. She thought about her phone notes. She thought about the moment she had picked up her tray and walked into the dining room tonight thinking it was just another shift, just another evening of moving quietly through other people's lives. She thought about the fact that tomorrow morning she would almost certainly not have a job. And she found that she could not locate the part of herself that was sorry about that. Selene was escorted from the room quietly, efficiently, the way the Aldrin Club handled all of its most uncomfortable moments, with discretion and well-trained speed. She walked out between 2 security personnel with her evening bag on her arm and her back straight and her face carrying an expression that had finally given up on performing anything. Just blank. Just the face underneath all the faces finally visible. The room slowly, carefully resumed breathing. The string quartet did not start playing again. Dominic Raines stood across from Mara. His daughter's hand was in Mara's and he was looking at that. He was looking at the fact that his daughter had crossed a room to stand beside a stranger. A waitress, a woman he had never spoken to in 3 years, and was holding her hand. He understood what that meant. He had to understand what that meant. I have to ask you something, he said. His voice was different now. The machine-still quality was gone, and what was underneath it was rawer than Mara had expected from a man like him. How long have you known that something was wrong? He thought about it. 6 months. And you? I kept notes, she said. On my phone. I kept thinking I would find the right moment. I kept thinking I didn't have enough. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place. Dominic looked at her for a long time. Why tonight? Mara looked at Ivy. Because she reached for the glass, she said. And I realized there was no more time to decide. Ivy squeezed her hand. Dominic nodded slowly. He looked like a man who was doing calculations of a kind he had never been trained for. Not financial, not strategic. The personal kind. The kind that tell you what your choices have cost and whether the account can ever be brought back to even. He crouched down to his daughter's level. Ivy looked at him and he flinched. The first time Mara had ever seen him flinch, at being seen by eyes he hadn't known were seeing him. Ivy. His voice broke on the second syllable. He held it together. We need to talk. You me. About everything. About all of it. He paused. We have a lot to talk about. I know, Ivy said simply. I'm sorry I didn't see. He said it like something that had been waiting a long time to come out. I'm sorry I didn't see what was right in front of me. Ivy considered this with the gravity of a child who is deciding whether to let something in. I know, she said again. And then, I hid a lot of it. You shouldn't have had to. No, she agreed. I shouldn't have. The club manager appeared at Mara's other side. She felt him before she saw him, that particular presence she associated with bad news delivered professionally. She let go of Ivy's hand and turned to face whatever was coming. Miss Vale. He had a pleasant face and a careful expression. I'm going to need to speak with you. Tonight has been. He selected the word with the caution of a man navigating a minefield. Unusual. The club will need to review the situation. I understand, Mara said. I want to be clear that we appreciate. It's all right, she said. Whatever you need to do. He meant it. She was surprised to find how completely she meant it. She turned to say something to Ivy, she wasn't sure what, something simple, something final, and found the girl already looking at her. Those clear dark eyes. That expression that was older than 9 years had any right to be. Will you come back? Ivy asked. The question sat in the air. Mara Vale opened her mouth. She had an answer somewhere. She knew she had an answer. But standing in the wreckage of an evening that had rewritten the lives of everyone in this room, holding the weight of a small girl's gaze, she found that the answer was more complicated than yes or no, more tangled and uncertain and alive than anything a single word could hold. And before she could speak, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number was blocked. But the name typed beneath the call indicator, in a message format, not a contact, was 3 words she had never seen before and did not yet understand. He knows more. Mara stared at those 3 words. He knows more. The phone kept ringing. Ivy was still waiting for her answer. And Dominic Raines, who had been watching Mara's face with the sharp, trained attention he usually reserved for things that cost him something, took 1 step forward. Answer it, he said quietly. Mara looked at him. She looked at Ivy. She looked at the blocked number on her screen and the 3 words beneath it and the door that they were opening into a room she hadn't known was there. She thought, some choices don't feel like choices at all. She answered the call.